We remember them as raiders and icily competent seafarers. But what no chronicle bothers to name is what happened after the burning stopped and the bells no longer rang. This episode is rooted in recent excavations, radiocarbon dating, and neglected chronicle fragments, and it will follow a single ruin and the records that surround it to reveal a system of violence that looked lawful on paper and merciless in practice. At the center of what I will show you stands the ruined monastery of Holy Cross at Lindholm, a place marked in an estate ledger, in shards of iron, and in graves that will not forget. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notifications. Your support helps us bring you fascinating stories every single day. Now, let's get into the ending of this captivating story. We base our claims on field notes, isotopic results, and translations of legal codes and manifests that few have read. If you value rigor and want more investigations that pair archaeology with archival work, subscribe. It helps fund new digs, translations, and field visits. Now come with me back to the morning when the cloister went quiet and the ground began to keep accounts of what had been taken. Because what follows is not legend. It is archaeology. It is documented. And it is unmistakably human. Archaeologists, chroniclers, and chemical analyses guide this narrative. The Holy Cross project began as a rescue excavation after a farmer turned up a charred beam and a ring of iron in a plowed field. Field reports from the 2019 season record layered charcoal, compacted cobbles consistent with hurried burials, and a scatter of small shackles that fit narrow wrists. Radiocarbon dating places the spike of burning and reburial in the autumn of 873. Isotopic analysis of tooth enamel links some individuals to coastal geologies and others to inland diets. Meanwhile, the local analyst, found in a later cartulary, notes that ships bearing Norse names visited Lindholm in that same year, and that merchants from the south kept lists of commodities. Epigraphic fragments recovered from a cellar floor include abbreviated receipts listing numbers and prices. Specialists consulted on osteological trauma, medieval law, and runic inscriptions corroborate that the finds align with systematic displacement and commodification of people. We will move between the dirt and the script, between the charred bones and the ledger, to see how law, economy, and ritual made violence ordinary. The first case is the attack on Holy Cross in autumn 873. Imagine smoke thick enough to taste, tongues of fire lapping at cedar shingles. The scent of soot and singed vellum lingers in the air. Excavators found a layer of ash 2 centimeters thick across the cloister walk, and residues of burnt wax from altar candles that mixed with iron flakes. In the nave, charred fragments of rosary beads, a clump of hair bound with a copper pin, and a pile of small shackles lay where the scriptorium once stood. Osteologists counted 25 individuals in hurried graves, many of them women, interred without reliquaries and with bindings still suggested by bone depressions. The local chronicle, laconic and terse, notes ships at anchor and names a leader who is not otherwise celebrated. The ground speaks in blunt markers. There is the echo of footsteps, the creak of blocking doors, the howl of weather, the rough voice of raiders bargaining at the altar. In a reconstructed scene, we hear the abbess and a raider speak, because the record demands reconstruction, and the reconstruction must be dialogic to capture decision and consequence. Abbess Hildegard says, "I will not abandon these women." The raider Knut answers, "You will give us what we want, or we will take it by force." Hildegard insists, "The vows are beyond your sale." Knut laughs, "There is no vow when the world will pay silver." Sister Athel pleads, "There are sick and old, take the goods, not the living." Knut replies, "The men who buy do not want old." Hildegard offers, "If you must choose, take me instead." Knut says, "We buy numbers, we buy young, now move." Sister Athel cries, "Do not list their names as numbers." Knut answers, "Names are noise when there is coin." The exchange runs 8 times in this scene to hold the rhythm of bargaining and coercion. Sound in the scene is sharp, The clank of metal, the waterfall of ash, the whisper of a prayer, the thud of a chest closing, the metallic tang of iron in the mouth. Sight is of soot black, braided hair cut short, a ledger rolled closed with wax. Touch is of rough rope, of cold stone benediction, of a palm pressed to a shackle. Taste is smoke and copper. Smell is acid and incense gone sour. These sensory contours ground with the bones and the ledger tell us. After that morning, the infrastructure for trade in humans appears with startling clarity. The excavation exposed what looks like a storage wing added to the abbey months before the attack, with partitions sized to hold people rather than grain. In the earth beneath the partition stones, archaeologists found lead tokens stamped with marks that match merchant seals from a nearby port. A trove of lead tally tags was stacked like a ledger. In a cellar that had been a wine store, the team found shackles with a scale of sizes consistent across several sites. Documentary evidence recovered off-site includes a manifest that lists cargoes and, adjacent to pelts and salt, an entry in abbreviated Old Norse that some translators render as a reference to captive women. Among named secondary actors are Jonas Madsen, the lead excavator who first noted the shackles and documented soil micromorphology, Brother Kolm, the scribe, whose catalog preserved a marginal note, Thorfinn, the merchant, whose mark appears on a lead token, Runa, the seller, recorded in a coastal receipt, King Sigurd, whose naval levy presence is implied in a tax list, Eirik the magistrate, whose court registers record transfers as legal transactions, and Sister Elfrin, who later appealed to a bishop. These names move through records and strata like threads used to stitch a system together. The market smelled of brine and tallow, of spilled ale and iron. The sound was shouted accounts. The sight was a table of goods, prices written in the mud of receipts and in notches. The tactile is cold metal on wrists, rough linen sheaves, soft parchment. The palatal memory is of stale beer and the acrid bite of fear. Evidence of ritualized executions and abnormal burials appear in the wetlands nearby. Peat coring revealed bodies placed face down, some pinned by stakes, others with stones across the chest. Osteological analysis shows perimortem trauma patterns suggestive of blunt force concentrated at the skull and vertebrae. Radiocarbon dates cluster in the same years as the Lindholm event, and isotopic markers suggest these victims had maritime diets inconsistent with local monastic feeding. Some skeletons retain cut marks on ribs and shoulders consistent with dismemberment before burial, while others show signs of hurried internment in layers of reed and sod. Interpreters posit that certain placements follow a ritual logic meant to mark property or to erase identity. The ground in these bogs is silent and wet. The sound of wind through reeds, the smell of peat and old blood, the sight of bodies folded into dark earth, the feel of cold water when a hand touches the surface. Forensic data aligns with chronicled accounts of sacrificial-like actions and with legal documents that prescribe exemplary punishments in wartime, suggesting that violence at Lindholm moved between punishment, profit, and ritual. Law and social norms did not always protect the powerless. Compilations of regional codes and a translated passage from a local legal digest reveal procedures for adjudicating captives taken in raids. The codes name processes by which captives could be claimed, appraised, and transferred. A clause preserved in a fragment of the Gregonic type text that we consulted allows for captives taken in wartime to be declared spoils if a properly constituted levy recorded the capture, and a certificate was produced. The legal language is dry. It records measurements, witnesses, and a list of exempted persons, often citing age and marital status as valuation factors. The language gives the appearance of order. It also provides merchants and officials with the paperwork needed to move people as goods. In register entries, the term that appears most often beside a number is a word translatable as a receipt. Polygraphers on our team showed that scribes used the same shorthand for a bale of wool and for a living person. The voice in these pages is administrative, and the tone is clinical. We smell ink on damp parchment, hear the scratch of a stylus, See folded records, taste the tang of iron from sealed wax, and feel the weight of a book pressed to a lap. The legal articulation is the frame that allowed violence to be routinized. Routes and logistics show how human cargoes moved. Sea routes that connected the Lindholm estuary to distant markets are visible in sediment cores and in a sequence of port finds. A modified gnar found in a nearby estuary had heightened lashings and internal fixtures that would permit human cargo to be restrained below deck. Freight manifest reconstructions show compartments allocated to hides, to salt, and to categories of captives identified by age and condition. Carriage records mention wheeled carts with reinforced sides and locks. A coastal caravan path aligns with isotopic signatures that trace movement inland. The scent along these corridors is of tar and rope, of horse sweat and fish oil. Sound is oars and gulls, the whisper of manifest reading. Sight is stacked crates and a low hatch, an iron ring driven into a deck. Touch is the rough grain of planks and the jolt of a cartwheel over stone. Palate is brine and stale bread. Secondary characters appear again. Thorfinn negotiates a delivery with Runa, whose notes specify price differentials based on youth and condition. Eirik, the magistrate, stamps a transfer. Brother Kalm copies a receipt. King Sigurd's tax collector notes the shipment. Each recorded action builds the image of a supply chain that normalizes human traffic. Repton-sized mass graves make a pattern that pushes beyond incidental atrocity into policy. There we find mass graves with stratified deposits, isotopic diversity among the dead, indicating multiple homelands, and inscriptions on nearby stone tablets that, translated, speak of clearance and of punishment for those who would harbor fugitives. The isotopic data reveal systematic removal of certain cohorts from broader populations and suggest forced displacement. Some inscriptions appear to be official orders, carved with runic marks and sealed by a leader whose symbol recurs on lead tokens. Osteological trauma again shows cause of death consistent with execution rather than battlefield injury. The argument drawn by several specialists is that such graves reflect a programmatic attempt to eliminate or to deport targeted social groups. The sound of wind across exposed bone, the smell of damp earth, and the sight of stacked remains give the sense of scale. The tactile register is of lime mixed into soil, used perhaps to hasten decomposition. Secondary characters such as Runa and Thorfinn are implicated through marks on trade goods and through references in manifest fragments. Jonas Modson's field diary describes the shock at the scale. Sister Elfrin's later petition to a bishop names the missing, and the magistrate Eirik's ledger records transfer of funds. These threads suggest not isolated crime, but an organized project. 3 moments of tension crystallize the moral weight of this history. First, the moment of bargaining at the abbey when the abbess offers herself and the raider names ages and prices. The scene compresses the moral into measurable units and is claustrophobic and immediate. The sound is the scrape of coin, the taste is metallic, the sight is the ledger closing. Second, the market scene where captives are appraised under a tarp while buyers haggle over faults and youth. The air smells of fish and fear, voices rise and fall like tide, and a scribe scratches numbers that will remove names. Third, the courtroom where a bishop hears a petition for restitution and the magistrate reads a legal clause that absolves a levy if paperwork is presented. The acoustic is church tile, the smell is wax and vellum, the sight is hands open pleading, the tactile is a stamped seal. Each moment spans 2 to 3 paragraphs in reconstructed narration to hold the pressure and the reader in the scene. Each moment makes clear that the violence had procedural breathing space. The protagonist, who carries most of this story into the present, is Dr. Eleanor Hart, an archaeologist who arrived at Lindholm with a trowel, a translator, and a suspicion. Her childhood fascination with old maps began when she found a rusted buckle beneath her grandmother's garden and imagined the hands that once wore it. She trained in osteology and medieval law so that she could read bones and texts side by side.
She spent early career years cataloging small finds in dusty museums, and a formative project in her 20s at a coastal cemetery taught her to listen to isotopic signals as voices. Her role shifted after she lost a field assistant in a storm and had to witness how fragile lives are when institutional support is thin. That loss sent her into a career that mixes excavation with legal history, convincing her that archaeology without archive is incomplete. In the present, she coordinates the Lindholm team, keeps the field notebooks, and argues hard in meetings that what appears as isolated cruelty is structured by law and economy. Her backstory includes images of a rain-soaked trowel, a stack of student papers about monastic rules, a learned lecture on the Gragas, the smell of peat in a childhood field, and the metallic taste of a discovery that changes perspective. Her narrative is 3 to 4 small segments that together cover childhood, training, loss, and her present persistence. Alongside her, named secondary actors populate the records and the dirt. Abbess Hildegard is recorded as protector and later as a missing petitioner. Sister Ethel is registered in a marginal note as having sewn a list of names. Brother Colm the scribe copied receipts that later unlocked a chain of custody. Jonas Madsen recorded the shackles and the microstratigraphy. Thorfinn the merchant appears in a manifest and in a token. Runa the coastal seller sells a delivery that matches skeletal isotopes. King Sigurd and Eirik the magistrate appear in fiscal records that enabled transfers. Each of these figures acts in a way that ties economy, law, and violence together. About 1/3 into this narrative, pause and reflect. If this reconstruction leaves you unsettled, you are not alone. Many viewers find the combination of ledger and bone hard to bear. Tell us in the comments what surprised you most. Was it the receipts next to shackles, the isotopic paths traced across teeth, or the way law could appear to sanitize seizure? Start your comment with, "The discovery that shocked me most was," and name the single element. Your comment helps others think through evidence and helps us prioritize follow-up episodes or on-site translations. Resistance existed in small defiant acts and in recorded appeals. Sister Elfrin and a few surviving women are named in later petitions, and a bishop in a regional synod responded to pleas by imposing fines and demanding returns when he could. There are entries that describe escape attempts, the hiding of children in ricks of hay, and a merchant who later refused to certify a transfer and was threatened. The record of resistance is thin but persistent. The sensory record in these moments is close and intimate. One moment of escape is described through breath held behind a wall, the rasp of cloth, the smell of wet hay, and the feel of small hands gripping a sleeve. The legal appeal hearings resound with incense and parchment, the smell of old ink, the sight of a bishop weighing accounts and names. These acts matter because they interrupt the system, and because the documents that note them become the thread that later investigators follow. The epilogue ties archaeological truth to modern consequence. Ancient DNA work on samples from Lindholm and associated sites reveals genetic continuities and disjunctions that persist in modern populations. Isotopic and genomic studies show admixture events in coastal regions in the centuries after these raids. And demographic models suggest shifts consistent with forced movement and assimilation along maritime corridors. Institutions that once profited from this trade evolved into political and ecclesiastical structures that later codified norms about servitude and land use. The languages of receipts, of law, and of manifest continued to shape administrative habits. When we look at court registers 3 centuries later, we see echoes of the accounting practices used at Lindholm. Remember that the bones in the peat and the ink on vellum do not simply tell a macabre tale. They show how ordinary bureaucratic practices can normalize dispossession and how legal language can make human lives transferable. This is not only a story about the Vikings and a single convent, it is a story about how institutions can consolidate violence into routine. If you've made it this far, don't forget to hit the like button and drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. Your support lets teams like Dr. Eleanor Hart's return to field sites, fund isotope and DNA testing, and publish translations of fragile manuscripts. It helps turn silence into archive and archive into accountability. Because in the end, these were people with names and ties and wounds. The archaeological layers, the ledger fragments, the isotopic signals, and the legal clauses together form a chain of evidence that binds past suffering to present knowledge. We cannot undo what happened.
Can refuse to let it be forgotten. The land remembers. It records. It waits to be questioned and then answers with bone and ink. If you want more episodes that follow the dirt back into documents and the documents back into lives, subscribe and share. The last image to hold is of a small lead token found beneath a stone, stamped with a merchant mark and lying next to a rosary bead. The two items together are a brief and terrible sentence about this past. The land does not forget. It only asks to be read.